Hey, this is Nicholas with the Backyard TARDIS here with another Backyard TARDIS Random Thoughts podcast. This time, going to be reacting and responding to a number of Red 5 podcasts that I enjoy and kind of give my thoughts on some of the things that they've been saying. And I've been stockpiling these up for about a month, so I've got a bunch here. We're going to cover the Sidebar Cantina, the Scarif podcast, Certain Point of View podcast, the Science Fictionary podcast, and then the Salty Nerd podcast. And some of these will be just focusing on one of their podcasts, some will be on multiple. So let's go ahead and get started. So the Sidebar Cantina did a 30-year retrospective on Sonic the Hedgehog. And of course, they just focused on the first game, but there was a few things I wanted to point out, because they were coming as individuals who were more Nintendo fans, but respected the position that Sonic had, and they'd gone back and played the first Sonic game. So a few things, I'm interested to see where they played that Sonic game, because the actual best place right now to play Sonic 1 is actually like on an iPhone or an Android, and to get a wireless controller to hook up to it, because that's the Christian Whitehead port that fixes a lot of the issues in it. But there are some notoriously bad ports, and so he was talking about some of the things that they experienced. I think he's playing a bad port of the game, because there are some very bad ports. Because there was, and initially when it launched on day one, there were some bugs in it that were updated and fixed in later releases of it on the Genesis. But some of the ports had a number of bugs that just weren't present there in the original one. So some of the things that you were experiencing, for instance, when you have the points and the special stages, those do have a purpose. The points get you continues, and then you have the special stages. Those get you the Chaos Emeralds. Now, in the first game, you don't become Supersonic. That's in the second game when you get all 7. But the first one, you get the 6, but it gives you the true ending. So you need to get all 6 to get the true ending. But anyways, I'm going to go over this. With Sonic, when you're talking about the legacy of Sonic, in addition to being on the Genesis, why it was such a big deal is Sonic was everywhere. In fact, there was a brief period in history when Sonic actually surpassed Mario in popularity. He was a serial. So when you think about it, he's had 5 cartoon TV shows. He's had 9 different official comics, one of which, the mainline Archie comic, still holds the record for the longest running video game adaptation to comic ever. So not just platformers, but the longest running video game adaptation, just shy of hitting a nice round number when it was canceled. But Sonic was just kind of invading everywhere. There was all sorts of different comics, books, cartoons, so it was dominating this kind of cross-media sensation, and it was the attitude of the character that they portrayed, not necessarily just what was experienced in the game, but the perceived attitude that was part of the marketing. Famously, MatPat of Game Theory has shown that, as far as moving across the screen, Mario actually moves faster across the screen than Sonic in Sonic 1. But you're looking at, because they put the character to the middle of the screen instead of moving left to right and then having the screen pan over, or always being on this side and seeing a whole screen. By moving him to the middle of the screen so you saw less of what, it gave a sensation of speed. It's a little trick Sega used there. You talked about having the difficulty of rings, and I found this funny because, as someone who started with Sega and then in Sonic and tried to move over to Mario, I have always had a hard time with Mario's 3 hit point system. With rings, you can get hit hundreds of times over and over again. You just grab another ring. You grab it right back. So while yes, you can have 500 rings and then that just disappears, you only need one to be safe. Whereas with Mario, those lives are so hard to come by that when you lose one, that truly hurts. So in that way, I actually think Sonic is easier because you're constantly getting rings. In fact, the most dangerous thing in Sonic are like instant kill crush deaths and bottomless pits. And those are like the two like notoriously hard things. And of course, drowning in water. And you talked about water levels. Well, you played Sonic the Hedgehog 1. It is notorious for difficult. Labyrinth Zone is difficult water levels. However, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, you have Chemical Plant, has a little water chemical area put in that was fun but challenging, but short-lived. And then you had like the Mystic Ruins, which had water, but if you were skilled, you didn't ever have to go in the water. Once again, nowhere near the frustration of that. But your statement of there's never been a good water level, Hydrocity Zone, Hydro Zone, whatever side of from Sonic the Hedgehog 3, whatever side of the fandom you are on how that is pronounced, that is just an amazing level. So definitely recommend you go play that, check that out. It's fast-paced and cool, and there's a lot of gimmicks under the water to speed you up. And there's a lot of unique things, like there's a part where like there's a turbine pushing you and you're grabbing onto poles so as not to be blown away, and then you break free and you have to try to, as you're sprawling, try to float up and down to hit the air bubbles. Lots of unique gimmicks to that one, and a lot of running on top of the surface of the water. That was a really cool effect at the time. So while I agree, by and large, water levels do stink. They have been done well, and they have been done well in Sonic. But yeah, in Sonic 1, Labyrinth Zone, that is very frustrating. And of course, there come flies. That's the downside to being at a park and having your doors open. The points. So the points do add up to something that gets you a continue. On modern hardware, that's probably not that important. You have so many lives. You lose those lives. Originally, that would take you back to the beginning of the game. But if you got up enough points, you would earn a continue, which would just take you back to the beginning of the zone you're at. So you'd lose your save point, but if you were 5 zones in on the second act, that would put you back at the first act of the zone you were on. So that the special stages, you earn the Chaos Emeralds. In the future games, that would lead to Supersonic and a cool final boss battle, but in this, it ends to the true ending card scene. Not a huge completionist bonus, but it does give you something. Also, the first Sonic the Hedgehog game had, outside of the first zone, Green Hill Zone, it had more of a focus on platforming, which was kind of contrary to how Sonic was being marketed. He was being marketed based off of that first level. And in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, I think they realized that that is what works. And so Sonic the Hedgehog 2, that is, the majority of that game is like the first level of Sonic the Hedgehog 1. It is designed to make you go fast. So I'm going to recommend to the guys at the Cantina, play through Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Maybe a good podcast for around this spring when the Sonic 2 movie comes out. Play through that second game and talk about it, because I think you're going to like that one a lot better. And then you talked about save points in a Sonic game. And you're right, that is something that, Sonic came out and then, Mario had his game come out that had the save points. However, the save points did come in with Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and that was a big deal. The Genesis was a little bit less powerful. There wasn't a lot of that stuff on the Genesis, but Sonic the Hedgehog 3 brought that in and really kind of upped how Sonic game works. Now, you were kind of wondering, what other big Genesis games are there? You know, the Genesis Sega is known for Sonic, but really, what else was there? The reason why they don't have, like Nintendo has Mario, and it has Donkey Kong, and it has Zelda, and it has Metroid, and it has Kirby, and it's, you know, every time it has a new one of these things, to an extent, they don't completely own it, but they have Pokemon exclusively. So when you think of those franchises, that's that. And every console, Nintendo tries to add a new franchise or two, and then keeps using them going forward. Sega had a very different philosophy, and this is why you don't see this. Is Sega wouldn't pressure for sequels, for the most part. Sonic was a huge cash cow, and in fact, Sonic Team, the studio that developed it, a lot of those people ended up leaving Sega because they got tired of being forced to make other Sonic games. But Sega, notoriously as a company, was all about creating new ideas, new IPs, what was fresh, new, innovative. And so a lot of times when a new console came out, they wouldn't make sequels to any of the games that were on a previous console. And we see that like on when you look at who was the mascot of the Master System before the Sega Genesis. Well, it was Alex Kidd. He's not really a presence. He's got a game on the Genesis, but he's not really a presence on the Genesis. But you have games like Vectroman. Vectroman was Sega's answer to Donkey Kong. So it's that kind of like pseudo, like 3D looking model, but going through a 2D plane back there, kind of the same way Donkey Kong was. But he's basically Wall-E. He's, you know, this trash man that's going at, and he comes back, and all the other robots have revolted. In Vectroman 2, he comes back and from a trash dump run into the sun, and all alien bug creatures have taken over the planet, and he's just got to go through and do that. But he's a transformer, but he's basically like Wall-E. Mankind has abandoned the Earth, they polluted it, and they've left this guy here to clean it up. There's you know, games like a lot of arcade ports, so a lot of racing games, a lot of sports games were exclusive on the Genesis. You had initially they had a lot of focus on like certain sports stars in their games. You had a focus on like Michael Jackson had a game, so stuff like that where they were taking a celebrity and doing a game about them. You also had stuff like Streets of Rage, so arcade beat 'em up. You had all of a sudden my mind just went blank, but there was another beat 'em up that was a really popular kind of medieval type, and so you had Shinobi. That was a really popular samurai game. So there were huge games, Gunstar Hero, you know, there were big games that were up there, but none of them really passed on from that system on to continued popularity. You had Phantasy Star, which later on the Dreamcast became Phantasy Star Online, but those are so different. It's kind of like if you went from the original first like 3 Final Fantasies, skipped a bunch and then went to 14, because the franchise went to sleep for a while, and then they brought it back as a completely different type of game, as an online MMO, versus being like a 2D over-the-top turn-based RPG. So very different in the same world, but very different games. You have, when they went to like the next system, the Saturn, you know, you had stuff like, you didn't really have Sonic games on the Saturn. Instead, you had Bug, and you had Nights into Dreams, Virtual Fighter, Virtual Cop, Virtual Tennis, you know, all those games were their first forays into 3D and stuff like that. Daytona USA, they kind of stepped away from a lot of the platformers. And so it's unique. Sega is always innovating. They're always changing. And so a lot of Sega fans, diehard Sega fans, look at Nintendo and they go, oh, kind of like people look at the MCU now. They go, oh, Nintendo is cookie cutter. It's another Mario game. It's another this. And really, Sonic is the only game that Sega has that they do that. But one of the things, kind of to Sonic's detriment, is they're always trying to completely innovate Sonic between games. And it seems like they'll have like 3 or 4 games that are not well received. In fact, they're critically just trashed and bashed. Most of the fans don't like them. They'll have their little diehard niche of people that do. And then they'll get a game that is like universally praised. And then everyone's excited for the next game because they think, oh, it's going to be that, but it's going to be better. And they'll completely change the playstyle. And that's kind of how Sonic's been since he's gone to 3D. And that's just Sega constantly innovating, not trying to tread water or do the same thing again. They don't want to have, they just had Sonic Mania and everybody's going, where's Sonic Mania 2? It was such an awesome game, harkening back to the Sega Genesis era. And they don't want to be New Super Mario Bros. 2. That's just not what Sega does. For better or worse, that's not what Sega does. So anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed your podcast. I want to make sure that comes across. I enjoyed Sidebar or Cantina's look at Sonic the Hedgehog. It was a unique thing coming from somebody who was of the Sega house, hearing people who were more kind of in the Mario camp, Nintendo camp, talking about that, and just kind of the different perspectives, because it does affect you what you played first. Okay, now moving on to the Scarif podcast. Scarif, the origin of the nerd. This is an interesting one because when I was in school, I was always kind of a heavyset kid, but I was good at sports. I went to a school that was primarily Asian kids. It was a refugee camp kind of area for Vietnam, people who came, who had sided with the U.S., mostly the Hmong and Minh individuals. And so that was what a lot of my classmates were, different cultures from the Vietnam era. And so I was a big guy, but of course that meant I had a little bit of an advantage of sports, but I never considered myself a jock. I would love to play sports, but I'd also talk nerdy things, and that never seemed like something that people didn't like. People liked superheroes, people that I never felt outcast for being a nerd. However, I realized later that I wasn't a super nerd. And because I kind of considered myself to be. But then I met some Trekkies. And I mean die-hard Trekkies that spoke Klingon. And, I had a friend that he used to call me a Trekkie. And I tell him I can't take that name because I'm not at that level. And so I took him to meet somebody else, and I said, and he's like, oh, I don't believe my friend here. He says you speak Klingon. I don't believe you. And he says, well, I speak Klingon. I speak a little bit of Vulcan, a little bit of Romulan, and enough Ferengi to get me through a spaceport. And my friend just looked at him and says, but there aren't spaceports, And he was like just mind blown, and So for me, I realized that, and then I spent a lot of my teen years getting very nerdy, trying to dive deep, learn more of those things, expand my nerddom. I was into video games, and I was into Star Trek at the time and Star Wars, but getting into Batman, and I was into Batman and Spider-Man, but expanding out to other superheroes and starting to expand out in my knowledge of other sci-fi franchises. Got into Stargate. It wasn't until later in life I got into Doctor Who, but I do find that while a lot of people chafe at certain things like Big Bang Theory, I had nerdy friends like that. I was academically very successful. Now, I didn't go to college. I To me, school was a waste of time. School was boring, and not trying to brag or anything right here. School was um, I was so far ahead of everybody else that it was boring. And the school system is not adept. People are at very different levels, and classes are way too crowded, and people don't get the proper education they need. And I looked at college as just going and doing more of that. For high school, I did high school in 2 years. I didn't go to public school. I went on independent studies and accomplished it in 2 years. And so for me, uh, I have friends who are kind of autistic, like Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory. I have friends who were super nerdy like that, about science. Um, in junior high, I even went into science competitions and stuff like that. So, and debates. So it's one of those things where I think I didn't experience a lot of the shaming people did. Now, part of that was because I was built like Frankie the Enforcer. That's how I looked to all the kids at school. I had all these short Asian kids, and I was the kid that, by 12, I was over a foot taller than them, and at least 150 pounds more than them, because I was a chubby kid, still a chubby guy, but and was that way since I was a preteen. And so maybe people were just too afraid to mock me about my nerdiness. But I always felt popular. I was always accepted at the popular tables. I was always accepted at the nerdy geeky tables. Even throughout junior high, I could go hang out with the skaters, all that kind of stuff. The basketball team, all that would hang out with me. But I could also go hang out with the kids who were really into video games and just wanted to talk about that. I never got that shame system, and that may have just been the schools that I went to. But something like The Big Bang Theory, like nerds today, they go, oh man, it's becoming too commonplace. They're making it cool to be a nerd, and that's not how we are. I really like how those shows normalize and bring it, because it's certainly definitely helped me and my wife. She is by far not a nerd. She does not. If she was nerdy about something, it's animals, horses, goats, different stuff like that. Being that, like, she previously was working as a vet tech. Now she's working as a dog trainer. So she's really into that kind of stuff. But no, you got phasers and morph cores and lightsabers, and no, she's out. Nothing. So, we watched Big Bang Theory together, and that really brought us closer because she got interested in the show, and she really related to Penny, but she wouldn't always get the jokes, and sometimes she'd stop and ask me, and I'd be like, jaw on the floor, like, are you asking me a nerd question? Really? Next one. Where do I want Star Wars to go from here? A lot of people, and to some extent, I agree, they say they want to get away from the Skywalker saga. Get far out of there, and to some extent, I agree. But for me, there is something about Empire. I want to see TIE fighters, I want to see X-Wings, I want to see AT-ATs, I want to see just the basic Star Destroyers. I want to see that era of Star Wars. I want to see Darth Vader. Now, to some extent, like, I've enjoyed Clone Wars, and it doesn't have that stuff, though it still has something similar to Stormtroopers. If you go 1,000 years out and there's still Stormtroopers, that feels weird, like, narratively. Like, why are people stuck on Stormtroopers? Every evil regime has white Stormtroopers. That's kind of weird. But if you get too far away from that, it stops feeling like Star Wars for me. That's where, like, something like Star Wars Visions, like, seeing those Star Wars things in it, sometimes makes it feel more Star Wars to me than stuff that I've enjoyed and consumed out of like the Old Republic, because there's an X-wing and it's anime and it's wacky and it's all this stuff that's not Star Wars, but it's more Star Wars to me because it has those iconic ships and things that I recognize. So that said, while I think from a narrative perspective, distancing themselves from the Skywalker saga will help heal the fan base, I personally want to see, right before A New Hope, more Rebels type content. So I think we're going to get that with Cassian Andor, but just stuff like that. I would love to see a Vader hunting down the Jedi series. I would love to see a live action Rebels, so to speak. But I also like stuff in the Mandalorian time period. That first 5 years. After there, maybe do some Thrawn. I definitely want to see live action Thrawn. I want to see it done well. And I would like to see them adapt those Thrawn books, that trilogy, as best as they can. Obviously, you can't give Han and Leia some kids that won't exist by the time of Ben Solo, because that would just be weird. But Mary Jade, she could exist. She could be, maybe that's why Luke is the grouchy old man on the island. Maybe she died. Maybe she defied defending the schools. To me, I think it would add more depth, bring her back. I would love to see animated adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. In the Empire, like right before Empire Strikes Back, that period there between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, make an animated show about that and make it about Han, Luke, and Leia. I would love that. So that's probably where I personally want Star Wars to go. Like Rogue Squadron, the movie they're doing. I know everybody after the Wonder Woman movie, which I haven't seen, the 84, are worried about Patty Jenkins doing that movie. And I get that. But that is something I want to see on the big screen. I want to see a Rogue Squadron movie. And then another thing you talked about, now we're going to move on to Certain Point of View. And with Certain Point of View podcast, they had their Aliens month in August. Yeah, that's how long I've been storing these up. And they talked about faith versus belief in aliens, and a lot of people hold out that, because they believe in God, they think aliens can't exist. And so I'm going to come out with my unique take. First off, if you're believing in the Bible, by the very Bible's definition and by what Minnie's definition of an alien, the Bible confirms that there are aliens. It speaks of angels from before the earth was created. So these are beings not of the earth, that are sentient beings living out there in, as the Bible describes, the heavens or a higher plane of existence. We see this in lots of media like Stargate, Battlestar Galactica. There's these beings, Star Wars. You have the ones that become one with the Force, the wills of the Force, that kind of stuff. These angelic beings, for all intents of words, the word alien would apply to them because they're of non-Earth origin. Although, by biblical standards, alien life is just further creations of God, and therefore it's not as alien as we would depict it. Now, however, if you're someone who has faith in the Bible, as I do, the Bible stipulates that God made mankind perfect, but gave them the gift of free will, and they chose to disobey it, and they chose to decide for themselves what was right and what was wrong. And this put a separation from them and God, and it was only on the basis of Christ's ransom sacrifice, getting real deep here, that God could even communicate with mankind because of that promised sacrifice, because we had become imperfect. Now, there's lots of scriptures in the Bible that, in fact, one of them says, bad association spoils useful habits, but that is repeated throughout the Bible of, those who hang out with the wicked or with the stupid will become stupid. Different, that's proverb there. Different scriptures that point that out. If God has created, he created all this, so either he intends mankind at some point to explore it all, because I don't think he created it just so the sky looks pretty, because some of it you can't see with the naked eye, or he's created other life out there. But the thought is, Earth would be bad association. And you only have to flip on the news or go on Twitter to realize how true that is. So if you are somebody who's a person of faith, this does not mean that you have to not believe in aliens. But it actually gives an explanation as to why we're not seeing aliens come to the Earth. Because we're the bad crowd. We would spoil their useful, good habits and uses of free will. And so, anyway, that's my little tangent there. Now we're going to go over to the Science Fictionary podcast. You guys had joked about, will What If get dark, especially with the zombies and stuff. And I think after the one about Doctor Strange, definitely it's going dark. It didn't go as dark about the zombie ones as what you described in the comic, but I definitely think, David, it's going dark, which is weird because it goes back and forth. Of course, I am fully behind in support of Captain America, God of Thunder, or Thor the First Avenger being a what if. And then you joked about Lord of the Rings, Lost in New York. I don't know, that just made me laugh. I'm a big Home Alone fan, so that made me laugh. You talked about the Scarlett Johansson versus Disney lawsuit, and a number of people talked about this, but it was interesting when I was listening to yours. One of the things that Disney came out and said is that she did get money from the streaming. And so, in my mind, it's one of those things that we don't truly know what the back end, and maybe they promised her or stipulated that it was going to be a certain kind of amount, and it proved to not be the amount of money that she thought it was going to be. But it's one of those things where a contract is a contract, so it all depends upon how the contract went, how it was reworded. But I think we have to let a court decide that, because we can give our public opinion, but we're hearing two very biased one sides, and we're not actually getting the evidence. We're not actually, nobody is publishing Scarlett Johansson's contract online. We're hearing one person say they didn't uphold the contract, and we're hearing another person say, well, we reached this additional agreement with you, and we gave you all this additional money that, despite the pandemic and the loss of money, we figured you would be very happy with. And if that's something she signed. So I look at that, but I do agree that, when it's these bigger individuals, if they're getting pushed around, the little guy's going to get pushed around. And I think this past year, there has been a ton of cuts because of the pandemic. And studios are hurting, but studios will use their overall hurt to justify unnecessarily hurting the employee. And because there's a difference. The funny thing is they have shareholders. So it doesn't matter if they're profitable. It only matters if they're more profitable than they were before. If the stock's going up, the company's wealth is going up. And that's like the dirty downside to everything, is that, during the pandemic, that's not possible. So even if they're still making money, they're not happy. And it causes them to do some unfair things with people. And that really gets to me. Black Widow Taskmaster. Now, Taskmaster, I'm not a huge Taskmaster fan, but I don't think I'm the only person who was a Taskmaster fan. Taskmaster, I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that, is a character that I think Deadpool has drowned out. So before Deadpool, he kind of filled that role. He was snarky like Spider-Man, and he could copy all their moves, so he was kind of just like Batman. There's been a couple of Batman villains that have been able to take down the Justice League. You have Deathstroke, which Deadpool is a parody of Deathstroke in DC, and then you have Bane, have been able to, and Lex Luthor, they've been able to take down the Justice League. I would say that Taskmaster is like Deathstroke in a lot of ways. He has a mutant power that allows him to instantly see and replicate. He has, a measure of super healing and superhero, human buffs, if you will. But he was a very witty character and a very charismatic character. And so to see him that way was disappointing. Now, I felt it very much fit the narrative in Black Widow. I just think they should have just not called it Taskmaster. I think they should have just made it a brand new weapon of the Widows, new character. I think it would have been perfect. But this was fundamentally changing, somebody who, like Deadpool, Merc with a mouth type character, who is, not only is he beating you, but he's saying quippy one-liners to humiliate you while he beats you, to a mute antagonist, was a big thing there. And so it's not one that bothers me enough to not like it, like I did with Iron Man 3. I hated what they had done with the Mandarin and that, but it is one enough that I understand people who are upset. Another one that you talked about, the trailer with the different Peters and Spider-Man No Way Home. I am being cautiously reserved because I think that we're getting the villains, but I actually don't think we're getting the other Peter Parkers. Now, I could be wrong, but I think these villains are being pulled across the multiverse, creating a Sinister Six for Peter to go across. But I don't think that they're that dangerous if you've got 3 Spider-Man. The other thing is I just don't see, as much as we as fans would love it, I don't see the MCU picking, when there's such a variety of Spider-Man out there from the different universes, picking the 3 white Peter Parker actors to all be starring in that, and not doing a Spider-Verse video where we have Miles Morales or Spider-Man 2099 or Spider-Gwen or Spider-Woman, any of those characters come into the story. Now, there is a chance that they could show up in addition to the 2, but I just don't see it. I am super hyped for this movie, and I will be okay with just seeing the villains. In fact, I think I appreciate the villains more than the Spider-Man. Of course, I'll be excited for that, but I think a lot of people are expecting it, and I'm worried a lot of people are going to be disappointed if it's not there. And so that's my thing. When that trailer, like, oh, and then they're like, Doc Ock is actually looking at Peter Parker from his dimension, or his Earth, or whatever. I don't know if that's true. I have a feeling, because those actors haven't really been out there going, hey, we're in this movie. I don't know. But the villain actors have. they've been actively saying, hey, we're in this movie. So I think people need to temper their hopes, because if they go in saying it's a far gone conclusion that it's going to have all this stuff and it doesn't, people are going to be upset. Another thing that the Science Fictionary, you talked about how the Lord of the Rings show is one which I have no attachment to Lord of the Rings. It's not a world I'm invested in. But you said that it has 1 billion, so it's too much not to cater to fans. Remember Star Wars. That is a lot of money to invest. It's a lot of money that could hurt them. However, you look at the example of Star Trek. Star Trek is spending lots of money, putting out lots of very well-looking shows, but they're not popular among classic fans. But people are subscribed to the streaming service, and they're not canceling it because they don't like the show. They may or may not be watching it. A lot of them are hate watching it and going, well, I already have the streaming service. So by that metric, it's content that is being pushed and moved. Whether people popular opinion likes it doesn't matter to the studio. And I think that will be the same for Amazon. I think they're spending this amount of money and they could be doing something completely different. Now, the fact that they're spending that kind of money because he's a fan and he wants, he's, multi-billionaire conglomerate owner of a company, making his company do something because he's really into it, that gives you a bit of hope. But everybody has their own interpretation of what a property is and what a property should be, how it should be seen in the modern day. But it also reminded me of Shenmue. And this was a game, so Shenmue was a game on the Dreamcast that they really bet a lot. They spent so much money on the development of this game that they would have to sell 15 million copies of the game to be profitable, to break even. Now, they only sold 9.5 million Dreamcasts. So they needed 5.5 million more copies than there were systems to play it on. Now, of course, they thought that this would sell the console. But what is Shenmue? Well, Shenmue is like an open world like Grand Theft Auto before Grand Theft Auto, but it had a lot of QTEs. It wasn't Grand Theft Auto. It wasn't go around and make mayhem. It was a deep, enriched story, like you would see in a typical RPG, but it was just this open world exploring, talking to people, and the idea of like NPCs would be programmed to go about a daily life. So people would like go into a store, buy groceries, take the grocery bag out, go out and walk down to their apartment and get in their apartment. And that was like mind-blowing at the time. Most of that money was taking the fighting game engine of Virtual Fighter and turning it into an engine for an open world game. And they came out with a second one, which in Japan was on the Dreamcast, but here in the West, it ended up going to Xbox. And then the franchise died. Originally, they expected it to be somewhere between 5 to 9 games. And then we're going to be chapters in a story. So it ends with the cliffhangers. And we just got a kickstarted Shenmue 3 like 2 years ago. So a decade later or more, that didn't even use that engine. Obviously, it didn't pay off for sale because it didn't catch. So it was an upfront gamble that would make this incredible game that would be cheap. Now, that's the same thing with Lord of the Rings. They're spending a lot on sets, and these are going to be big, expensive sets. Now, if this ends up being a 5 to 10 year show, it could have movie quality because most of the expensive movie grade sets were paid for at the beginning, and then the budget for the show going forward, they're going to need less budget to deliver movie quality. So I expect this to be a good looking show. However, if it is a flop, it's going to be a big flop. That is the gamble of doing this, and that's what Sega found. This game didn't become a huge hit. It became a cult classic, and they spent a ridiculous amount of money, put themselves in debt, and was part of, the debt that caused them to leave the console market. The Dreamcast was semi-successful, but the problem is semi-successful wasn't paying the huge amount of debt they had. They needed to be in the top of the market to make the kind of money they needed. So the same thing for Amazon. It's a cautious tale. Okay, lastly, we're running out of time here. This is going to be my longest random thoughts, but the Salty Nerd podcast. They let me consult my notes here. So yeah, I wrote the other ones down, but okay. Yeah, you talked about the villains in Shang-Chi and how in the MCU they've always got to be a sympathetic villain. I would counter with that and say that actually that's the opposite of the MCU. The MCU was guilty for the first two phases of being the opposite of that, and it has been mocked for that. So that is why you get your sympathetic villain instead of the Mandarin, who is the mustache-twirling villain. Now, I think they did that for one of two things. One, they combined the Mandarin with all of a sudden his name. But anyways, he was very much a Chinese stereotype that would not be accepted in today's world. So I think making him a sympathetic villain and not making him the mustache twirling, I'm just evil because I'm an evil villain, is going a long way to not encounter that criticism. But I also think that you look at the original Iron Man, and what did you have? You had just an evil Iron Man. And you kind of got that in Iron Man 2. And you kind of got that in Iron Man 3. And you got that in Ant-Man. And you got that in, who is the Red Skull? Well, he's just an evil Captain America. Who is, and you go through all of these characters, and one of the things that people were upset was every time we get a new Marvel hero, they get an evil version of themselves that is super shallow, and it's just kind of like a mirror image of them. What if they were just evil? And they got to bite them. And the villains are one and done, and in fact, most of them we can't even recall who they were. And that's why, like Thanos and Loki and Killmonger, like those sympathetic or villains that had, we went into why they were bad, why they did that. Those villains are super popular. People are like, finally, some Marvel villains that actually have some meat on the bone. And so with Shang-Chi, they do the same. They're copying. A lot of people have likened him to the Mandarin character to Killmonger. That they're very similar, emotionally troubled individuals where you can see emotional and family drama pushing them forward. Marvel has a lot of the kind of those villains like Magneto and stuff like that, but it also has villains like Apocalypse, who is like just straight up evil. Galactus, straight up evil. But it's funny, and then I think the height of that was Ultron. Now, I loved Ultron, but everybody hated it because they were like, he was just a dumb joke. Like, he should have been this and that and this, his motives, he was so one note. But, it's... So, yes, I get, like, we're in an era when we're getting, like, the Cruella movie, and we're getting, like, let's be sympathetic towards Cruella. I think that's silly. I think, we do need some villains that are just mustache-twirling villains, but that has been something that Marvel has been accused of having shallow villains that didn't have proper motivations, like DC villains. And I think that's why we're not going to see that for a while, is because they're trying to get away from that stigma. And then what'll happen? We'll all start complaining that why can't you just have a straight up villain? And then we'll have it flip back to that, and then we'll probably complain that they're shallow villains again. It's a never ending thing. We're never happy. Anyways, moving on. Let's see. I got some notes here about your C review. Ba 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 da ba 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 ba. Go check out the Salty Nerd Patreon for the best episode of C review. Once you become a Patreon, you'll get the joke. But definitely, you guys have been killing it lately with your reviews on C, your review on Norseman, and I really think that's going to be your guys' stride, is getting kind of these off-the-wall shows that are never a thing. The fact that you're getting the attention of the actors and people involved in the show, I think is really cool. And with that, Red 5 Family for Life. I've been enjoying all your podcasts. I have more notes, but I've run out of time, so that'll just have to be in a future Random Thoughts podcast. Hope everybody has a good day.